If you've been on the fence about whether Tales of the Shire is a game for you, then this video may help. But first, hi, I'm Ellie, and this is the Cozy Gaming Club where I love to talk about all the latest and greatest cozy games. And this one has the potential to be both, but does it stick the landing? In this video, I'll be going through my entire first season in the game, listing my pros and cons along the way, and giving you a taste of what to expect from your own playthrough. I hope this helps you decide if this is a game for you, and let me know down in the comments if you want to see another season. And a big thank you to the developers for gifting me a key. I started by creating my hobbit, and I've got to admit I was impressed by how many details there were here, right down to the amount of hair on my hobbit feet. Then we chose our hobbit name before we finally got to see a familiar wizard who disturbed our slumber. Not that our hobbit knew who he was at this point, but he was kind enough to share his car and gave us a lift to Hobbiton since he was also heading that way. After he dropped us off, I met the first of the strange NPC hobbits, and you'll see them a lot in this video. There are primary hobbits like Orlo, who we meet in a second, and then there are these hobbits who lurk around all day doing nothing except making odd comments. It's a bit like the market stall owners in Fae Farm, except they don't even run a stall. They're supposed to be set dressing, I guess, but end up being very jarring. Moments later, we met Orlo though, who showed us to our new home. It's a shame we couldn't access it through the boarded up front door, but after exploring a little, we managed to find a back door, and got a first proper look at our new home, which was very homely, if a bit messy. Of course, my first thought was to explore the place, and I investigated my new pantry, as well as the dining room, before I headed to the kitchen. My new quest was to cook rhubarb porridge, and I was excited to try out the cooking minigame, as cooking for your neighbours was supposed to be a big part of this game. So I think there should have been some sort of tutorial here, because I didn't realise what I was supposed to be doing, and kinda just chopped up the rhubarb really smooth to make a nice porridge like I would in real life. But thankfully when I put it in front of Orlo, he loved it and said it hit the spot. Plus our friendship leveled up, so he must have really liked it. And as a reward, I got a brand new recipe from him. This was one of the things I did quite like about the game. Every time you reached a new friendship level, you got some sort of reward from the hobbit. It was only then that I discovered the bedroom and the wardrobe where you can change your clothing, appearance, and name at any point, which is great. Back outside, it was time to check my postbox where I had a letter from Farmer Cotton inviting me to come to the Green Dragon. So off I went. This was also when I learned how to use the tracking feature in this game, which I am kinda lukewarm on, to be honest. Essentially, you can select a location or a character on the map to get directions for how to get there. But the thing is that instead of a compass, indicator, or minimap to guide you, there are these blue birds that fly overhead. At first, it was kinda cute and whimsical, but in practice, they're actually quite difficult to follow as they fly in and out. I also tried to talk to this NPC, but realised he was one of those other NPCs instead of one I could actually interact with. Anyway, I made it to the square, which is where I got hopelessly lost and ran around confused for a little bit, looking for the next direction until I finally spotted the birds and managed to get back on track. At the Green Dragon, I met Lily Cotton, who was Farmer Cotton's wife. She runs the Green Dragon and gave me a little introduction before taking me to meet Farmer Cotton, who was arguing with someone called Sandy Man. They were having an intense debate about whether Bywater is a village or part of Hobbiton, but didn't manage to reach an agreement. Soon after, we met Nora and Fosco, who suggested we ask the official assessor to decide whether Bywater was a village once and for all. But then, Orlo brought up a book of rules, and after a lot of discussion, I was eventually given a quest to find it. And so began one of the most long-winded quests I think I've ever played. Although I guess it was a good alternative to the usual Meet the Villagers quest. One other thing about the map which you'll notice here is that the primary NPCs won't turn up on it until you've spoken to them. So I was blindly following the birds for this one as they led me to meet Old Noakes. Along the way, I had my first interaction with what I think are called tales, which are these little moments of inspiration or thought where you confer with your inner dialogue. But they can also involve other people, as you'll see in the future, and some of them do have several tales in a series, although they aren't really recorded anywhere, so you just need to look out for the glowing sparkles. I quite like them though, I thought they added something to the game. One other thing I wasn't a huge fan of with the NPCs is that you can't actually interact with them outside of the quest lines. Instead, they'll immediately make you say bye instead of having a conversation, which is a little sad. Anyway, then I got really lost trying to follow the birds, but I eventually managed to get back on track and make my way to Old Noakes. Although it did take quite a lot of spinning the camera to try and see which way the birds were telling me to go. Old Noakes, it turns out, is the fisherman, which I was really excited about because I love fishing in games. Although he was incredibly rude and demoted me to newcomer, after answering his fishing question, he gave me a quest to catch 3 fish, and also told me that he didn't have the book I was looking for. Well, seeing as I was already there, I decided to try my hand at fishing, and thankfully it's super easy. All you need to do is move in the opposite direction of where the fish is swimming, which is made even easier to identify by the curved line they've added to guide you. So I was able to catch 3 fish in no time, and then decided I'd give them to Old Noakes before going to meet Farmer Cotton. But when I got there, Old Noakes didn't remember me. What a mess, but he eventually let me keep my rod and gave me some cream as a reward. Then once again, I got super lost, and I mean super lost. 2 birds crossed in front of me, and another bird led me down this tiny path instead of to the left where you can see Farmer Cotton waiting patiently. It was a mess, but I finally made it to Farmer Cotton and asked him about the book. He remembered that Old Noakes had given him a book with animal pictures in it, which I wish he had mentioned earlier that morning, and wrapped up by telling me he'd passed it on to someone called Delphi. Although he did give me some seeds in a watering can for my troubles, so I suppose we'll call it quits. Once again, I decided to finish the side quest first, as I wasn't sure how long the day was and I wanted to make sure I'd planted my seeds before the end of it. So I made my way home. One strange thing about Tales of the Shire is that you don't till the ground and plant your seeds directly into it. Instead, you use planters like in Wildflowers, but the game does generously give you 5 to get started. Although I must admit I hadn't bought any more by the end of summer because I found I never had enough money with all the food you need to buy. The other strange thing is that to plant seeds you need to enter build mode, but then you can plant them all and you can plant multiple seeds in one planter like I was experimenting with here, even though I chickened out. After interacting with another small tale about my garden where I said I wanted to fill it with vegetables, I watered all my plants before heading to meet Delphi. It was now evening and I was determined to at least meet Delphi before it was time to turn in for the night, so off I went gallivanting through fields and across beautiful tree bridges and corridors until I reached her house. Or should I say tree, because her home was built into an enormous tree stump. I asked her about the book, which she said she'd given to Willow because her daughter Lily loves oliphants, and it had some pictures of them inside. But she left me with a small tidbit of wisdom about following the butterflies. Fortunately, Willow didn't live too far away, so I decided to chance it and made my way to Willow's house. I found Willow and Lily resting on a hillside and quizzed them about the book, which Willow had apparently used as a step to reach high places when renovating my house. But she didn't have it anymore as she'd given it to Mrs. Cotton. So I'd gone full circle and needed to head back and find the person who had started it all. I wasn't going to give up yet though, and with the sun setting behind the grassy mounds, I ran back into town to find Mrs. Cotton. She was of course at the pub at this time, and I made my way inside, where I bumped into young Tom Cotton standing with the rest of my new friends. We quickly exchanged greetings before I spotted his mum behind the counter and went to ask her about the book. She had apparently given the book back to old Ruby, but as she wasn't around to ask, she suggested I speak to Nora and Fosco, who had been her students. They might know where it was, but she said I shouldn't speak to them outright and should instead invite them for a meal. It hit night just as we wrapped up our conversation and I sprinted home. Quickly, I cooked 2 meals in the dead of the night, although I would never recommend cooking the meals the night before in the future, before making my way to my writing desk where I invited both Nora and Fosco for a meal at my house the next day. Then it was finally time to call it a night, so I collapsed into bed and so ended my first day. It had been a busy first day, but I felt like I'd accomplished a lot. The next morning, I went straight to my postbox where I found a letter from each of my guests, who'd shared with me the flavour of food that they were craving that day. Sour for Fosco and sweet for Nora. This is why I don't recommend cooking the food until the day of, as now I can't change the meals, so their requests may not line up. I also received a letter from Lily asking me to check on young Tom as he'd been acting strange recently, and a letter from Orlo thanking me for inviting him to dinner. To start with, I watered all of my plants before I headed inside to start the meal. Nora wanted something sweet and liked cool taters and beans, which was thankfully something I'd managed to cook yesterday, so I served that up in front of her. But I didn't know any of Fosco's food cravings, and I'd made something spicy instead of sour. Funnily enough, you can place the dishes wherever you want on the table and change the sizes of them if you want to take photos of your meals. Before long, we were digging in, and Nora was delighted with her meal while Fosco was shaking his head in disappointment. After eating, we chatted a little outside, and Fosco reminded Nora that she always used to fiddle with something during class, and it turned out to be a small key. Well, I knew exactly where that was going, in the mysterious locked drawer in my new writing desk. They bid me farewell, and I quickly shoved them out so I could go investigate. It was no surprise that the Book of Rules was locked inside the desk, but I was surprised by just how big it was. Finally, this back and forth quest was over, but I still needed to take it to Orlo, so I immediately set off for town. I did get a little distracted by the butterflies who led me to some blackberries on the way though. It took a little adventuring, but I soon managed to find Orlo at the far end of town and showed him the Book of Rules. He told me to take it to Nora as Farmer Cotton couldn't read, so off I went again. Once again, I got a little lost, but I did manage to chance upon young Tom Cotton, and remembering my side quest, I asked him how he was getting on. After taking me somewhere a little quieter and out of the way, he confessed that he'd lost Lady Buttercup, his dad's prize cow. He had been looking all over for her, but she was nowhere to be seen. But there was one place he hadn't looked yet. After promising to take a look and see if I could find her, I continued on my quest to find Nora, and found her in the shop with a delightful duck sitting on a pile of threads. She gave me a garden green salad recipe, and then I told her about the Book of Rules, which she promised to start reading immediately. While I was there, I also spoke to Fosco, who had a gift for me as well, a simple sprout soup recipe. I also had a quick look at Nora's shop while I was there too, and she sold so many cute outfits. I wanted them all, but had no money. With that quest completed for now, I looked at my quest log and I had so many things to do. I decided I'd start by visiting Delphi and completing her quests, so I began the long trip to her house in the woods. She was delighted to hear that I'd been following the butterflies and foraging from nature, and gave me some rhubarb as a reward before sending me on my way. Although I did take a quick glimpse at her shop, which was filled with jams of every variety. Then it was back on the road, and I spent a long time foraging before making my way to the fields to find a cow. Along the way though, I needed to stop at home because my inventory was full, and this is my next big issue with the game. Despite the map being so big, and your run speed being so small, and there being so many things to collect, your inventory is tiny. There are only 10 spaces to get you started, and as you've seen, you'll be gifted loads of things for completing quests and find even more in the wild. The other issue is the stacking. Fish don't stack, and other food items only stack up to 9, so you'll be quickly running out of space all the time. Oh, and you can't buy backpack upgrades. Instead, you need to unlock them by completing quests, but more on that on day 8 when we finally get around to it. So I offloaded all of my items apart from one vegetable I brought along for motivation for the cow. The cow, it turned out, was super deep in the woods, and it took me a while before I found her sprawled on the side of the road. A baby marrow quickly picked her up though, and we started our walk back to town. Until she got tired and laid down again. It was time to feed her once more, but I hadn't brought anything else with me. I had a quick run around and found a mushroom hidden behind a tree, which luckily I was able to use to convince her to follow me again. Back at Cotton Farm, and young Tom Cotton was waiting excitedly for me to arrive. He was so grateful and gave me some beef as a reward for finding her. While I was there, I also spotted these glittery blue sparkles, which usually symbolize another tale, so I interacted with them. This tale featured old Tom Cotton and his daughter Rosie, who were arguing about going to ask Sandyman for flour. Farmer Cotton didn't want to go because he didn't like him, but Rosie volunteered to go instead. Too bad he didn't appreciate her and all her hard work though. I hope that at some point during this video we'd be able to make him realize how good his daughter was. There was one final quest I could complete today, so I made my way home to cook some food. But along the way I passed Willow and Daisy's workshop and spotted that one of them had a quest for me. It turned out that Daisy was stuck on a riddle that Nora had given her, and she wasn't sure what the answer was. She asked me if I could help solve it, and I promised to take a look. I have to admit though that at this point, I was stumped. But it was almost the end of the day, so I continued to make my way home, which is when I discovered another issue with the birds. Even though most of my farm was blocked off and inaccessible, the birds still try to take me home that way, and this will happen many times throughout the video. It wasn't a huge issue though, as I could easily work out the way home, but it was a bit frustrating. On my way around though, I spotted Farmer Cotton, and seeing he had a quest icon, I went to talk to him. Rather than giving me a new quest though, I somehow completed his existing quest to bring him 3 vegetables. I suppose I was carrying 3 vegetables on me, but I was expecting to have to have grown them myself. Either way, I got some taters as a reward, and then it was time to go home. I took a look at my writing desk before heading to bed and decided to invite Delphi and Nora to a meal the next day, as they were my 2 favourite characters so far, and I figured if I needed to cook a meal for a quest, I may as well kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Day 3 was raining, so there was no need to water my crops, and I immediately made my way to my postbox to grab today's mail. Nora and Delphi sent me their flavour requests for the day, both sweet, and Fosco said he could give me some furniture to help decorate my new home. And finally, I got my letters from Fosco and Nora from yesterday, thanking me for my meal invite. Nora had enjoyed it so much that she'd sent me a pillow and some hops. Back inside, it was time to cook, and I already knew what Delphi liked, but I wasn't sure how to make it sweet. So I made my way into town, certain that one of the shop stalls must be able to help. Young Tom Cotton sold a range of farm produce like meat, cream, eggs and cheese, while his dad sold every seed under the sun, and the most expensive planters I have ever seen. Then I spoke to Hobson Hornblower, who tried to sell me a beautiful silver swan, or duck, but didn't manage to win me over. I did look in a shop though and found every variety of seasoning. Quickly I bought some sugar and made my way home, completely oblivious to the fact that I wouldn't be able to use it, as you'll soon see. I fired up my stove and quickly started cooking up the Tukborough pikelets for Nora, except I couldn't work out how to use the sugar. So I panicked and went exploring again, which is when I found Sandyman's shop and started the next part of the tale from yesterday. Rosie tried to buy flour from Sandyman, and when asked why, she lied and said she was cooking the biggest pie for all of the customers at the Green Dragon Inn, and it was definitely not for her dad. No siree. Eventually I gave up and made my way back home to cook. My first dish did not go well, as I couldn't work out how to cook the food to make it go from crisp to tender. But my second dish went very well, and I even managed to hit the star goal and achieve a textured rating. With everything cooked, it was time to eat, and Nora and Delphi seemed to have a great time. As a reward for increasing our friendship, Nora gave me some hazelnuts and another pillow, and Delphi gave me a recipe for cooling embers. Now I need to decide what to do today, and I figured that completing my cooking quest was the best place to start. Which meant it was back to the Green Dragon to see Lily. She was pleased with my hard work and gave me some beans and maize, filling my backpack almost to the brim. Then, since he was close by, I went to chat with Fosco about furniture. He gave me a range of fancy furniture pieces as well as a fish for some reason, and then it was really time to head home because my inventory was full. I decided to really clean up my house, and so started picking up all the random pieces of cutlery and scrolls littered everywhere, and tidied my pillows and the blankets draped across every surface. It was a long slog, but I finally managed to make it look a bit more like a home. And then it was time for an adventure. I started at home and made my way along all the rivers and lakes, looking for any strange trees by the water's edge that resembled eyes, until I finally stumbled across it at the top of the map. I called out to Daisy immediately, who was delighted. She told me a sweet story about how even though the tree wasn't a tree anymore, its wood was probably still in Bywater, as they reuse everything. Then she gave me another riddle to wrap my head around. I immediately knew what this one was though. And even though it was getting kinda late, I set off for the forest and the waterfall I was sure laid within it. It was so dark by the time I found it, but Daisy still came out to take a look at the impressive waterfall. I was sad she had no more riddles for me, but it was probably a good thing given how late it was already. So I made my way home, and then I realized I hadn't done my test to see how long the days were yet. So I stood in my house and waited and waited and waited, until I keeled over at exactly 41 minutes, which is possibly the longest day I have ever seen in a farming game. And the only punishment was that when I woke up the next morning, it was now morning instead of dawn. So I'd missed a whole section of the day, but I'd not lost any money or items. I tended to my garden first thing the next morning, collecting all my brown taters. And then I checked my postbox, which had a lot of mail in it. First was a letter off Orlo saying he'd carried me to bed in his wheelbarrow last night, followed by a letter from Farmer Cotton inviting me to a big village meeting. Nora and Delphi both thanked me for second breakfast the day before, with Delphi giving me a bowl as a thanks, and Nora sent me a second letter about mathoms, whatever they are. But that's not it, because I also had a letter from Hobson letting me know he had an opportunity for me, which was definitely a scam. And finally Fosco, who was sick and needed my aid. There was a lot to be getting on with, and to be honest, I didn't know where to start. But I decided to begin with Fosco's quest as it was the closest, and on the way I found a random parcel on the side of the road. It said it was from your favourite cousin at Bucklebury, but didn't give me any more information. Clearly Orlo wasn't taking his post job very seriously. When I spoke to Delphi though, it turned out that it was her missing parcel, so at least it had almost made its way there. I also asked about a cure for Fosco, and she asked me to collect some herbs to make a tincture. Sadly, I had literally just emptied my inventory of everything, so I made a note to come back once I'd found some herbs and headed into town instead. It was time for the big town meeting, and sadly, it did not go as expected. The assessor determined that Bywater was not a village, and in fact there would be a lot we would have to do to make one, like make some clubs and hang up a wolf's head over the gate. Although how we do that when wolves hadn't been seen in Bywater in years was a mystery. Fortunately, there was still plenty for me to be getting on with, so my next task was to visit Hobson. He had promised me a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, which was apparently a rusty fork that was supposedly part of a dwarven dining set. And for the low price of 1 silver piece a month, I would be able to collect the entire set. Understandably, I was not interested in the slightest, so he basically gave it to me for free and said I should try to sell it on. Well, I didn't want to do that and annoy any of my new friends, but it was a quest. He also tried to sell me a box of old hat pins, and eventually I convinced him to go and sell some door hinges to Willow, as she might need them. I can honestly say he will never be one of my favourite characters. But I was soon rid of him and back in town chatting to Nora, who had a Bywater story to tell me. It was a goodie. She told me why Farmer Cotton and Sandy Man were worst enemies, and to be honest, I can completely understand why Cotton hates him now. Imagine faking you've lost your dog and taking advantage of a kind family who tried to help you. With hate flooding through my veins, I decided now was the best time to try and sell Sandy Man Hobson's knockoff items. So off I went. Sadly, he didn't fall for it though, and decided to be an awful person again, and suggested I sell it to Farmer Cotton instead. I was not impressed, but the quest demanded it, so off I went. Fortunately, Lily saw right through Hobson's lies and refused to let Farmer Cotton buy it. But she told me Hobson would have forgotten about it in a few days, so I should just keep it for myself. It wasn't like I needed any more cutlery after old Ruby's huge collection at home, but there's another fork for my house. I finished up the day by planting and watering some new seeds I'd bought, and I invited Orlo and Old Noakes around for dinner the next day. The next morning, I woke up to more letters, including my flavour requests from Old Noakes and Orlo, a letter from Hobson discontinuing the famous fork line, and a letter from Nora about opening village clubs. The last one sounded the most exciting, so that's what I did first, and so began the next mammoth back and forth quest. Nora explained that we needed someone to run each club, and it was down to me to get them on board, starting with Delphi for the foraging club. I actually already needed to visit her about the medicine for Fosco, so this worked out quite well. But first I needed to go to Daisy and ask her to join the club so that we could convince Delphi together. Since my house was on the way though, I decided to stop there first and serve my dinner guests for the day. Old Noakes wanted some sour fish cakes while Orlo wanted a sweet fish pie. It was actually while cooking these meals that I worked out how to make food more tender to move the flavour icon horizontally as well as vertically. Essentially, after chopping ingredients up, you can also add them to the frying pan. This is also when you can add seasoning to a dish to make it match the eater's preferences. Unfortunately, I'd not worked out how to make them crispier yet though. With both guests satisfied and my friendship rewards collected, it was time to go and find Daisy, who was beyond excited to join a foraging club, to go on adventures and search for treasure. I don't think she really understood what it was, but we needed her support, and for that we needed approval from her mum. But Willow, being Willow, said the only way we could get approval was if we did something for her first, which is how I found myself in the woods looking for windfall wood. At least I only needed 3 pieces. Before long, Daisy and I were on our way to convince Delphi to set up the foraging club. I started by turning in all my herbs for the medicine for Fosco, and then the convincing began. We tried to be subtle, but Daisy had other ideas, and our entire plan was soon spilled out in the open. Fortunately, Delphi loved the idea, and with that we had our first club. And the first session was right now! We needed to collect 3 items from the world around us, but the only issue was that my backpack was full. Again. So I was limited to only collecting items I already had inside it. After trying that for a few minutes though, I gave up and ended up tossing out some things to make room for some new forageables. But our first session was a success. The next challenge was to convince Old Noakes to set up a fishing club, and Nora suggested I talk to Marigold and invite him over for a meal. I had literally just had him around for food that morning and was cursing myself for my bad timing. There was nothing I could do about it now though, as I made my way to check up on Fosco. Sadly, the medicine seemed to have the opposite result, as Fosco was now even worse than he'd been before. I sprinted back to Delphi, who suggested I make a sour meal to counteract the effects of the tincture. Naturally, I rushed home and whipped something up immediately, and then it was back to Delphi to drop it off as the day drew to a close. Day 6 brought with it even more mail. 2 accepted invites from Daisy and Old Noakes, as well as thank you gifts from Old Noakes and Orlo, and some invitations from Orlo and Nora to go see them. I had another busy day in store for me apparently. After emptying my inventory, I went into town in search of Fosco and Nora. Thankfully, Fosco was feeling much better today, which was great news after yesterday's fiasco. But he didn't blame me or Delphi, which was a big relief. Then I spoke to Nora, who had more exciting town gossip to share with me. It turned out the fork that I'd kinda swindled out of Hobson was in fact very, very valuable, and was part of a unique Bywater set. Outside the shop, I found Orlo hanging around, which was perfect as I needed to chat to him as well. He confessed that he was concerned that people in Bywater didn't think he was important, and that he wasn't doing enough to help the town, which I pointed out was ridiculous as he was the town's only postman and he was doing so much to help out. After all, look at all the mail he'd delivered to me already, and I'd only been here for 6 days. With all those quests completed, it was time to get home to serve dinner for my guests. I cooked up a delicious rhubarb pie for Daisy and some more fish cakes for Old Noakes, both of whom loved them when they came around to eat. After a little convincing, Old Noakes agreed to run the fishing club for me, and then it was time to find my next victim. Eager citizen to help out. I also needed to end the day early here because I was going out IRL, so I made my way home to save and end the day, only to find out that I couldn't. You can only go to sleep if it's evening or night, which isn't great if you need to skip a day or save early like I did. Also, I thought because when I went to the options menu, I saw an option to save, and it worked. It turns out that in this game you can save at any point in the game, which is just spectacular. When I came back later that day, it was time to find Farmer Cotton and implore him to lead the gardening club, and he had already been making plans. But it turned out that Farmer Cotton had a habit of biting off more than he could chew, and wouldn't be able to run the club as well as the farm. That's when Rosie volunteered, which I was over the moon about because Rosie definitely deserved her time in the spotlight, but as we'd grown to expect, her dad was very dismissive. He challenged us to grow a better vegetable than he could, and only then would Rosie be able to take the lead. I made sure to chat to her for some tips, and she taught me all about plant neighbours, which would undoubtedly help me to grow a 2-star crop. This is when you plant 2 plants that like each other together to boost their growth. But where there's plant neighbours, there's also plant enemies, so keep that in mind. When I woke up the next morning, it was to disappointment, because I didn't have any 2-star vegetables. But I did have a letter from Old Noakes asking me to come see him. Despite eating at my house twice already, he apparently still had no idea who I was, so it was time to set the record straight. He also asked me to prove my fishing worth, which I think means the club was now open, but I wasn't 100% sure. Anyway, I spent the rest of the day running around with nothing to do, which is when I came across Neffy and her adorable dog Ladle, a new major NPC who didn't understand the concept of friends. But that was it for the day, which brought us to day 8 with its shiny 2-star cucumber and a peculiar absence of mail. This must be the first day I've not had any letters. But that was okay because I had a cucumber to show off. Which sounds wrong now I read it back. I immediately went straight to Rosie's house and showed off the cucumber, which everyone was beyond impressed with. Rosie won her place as leader of the gardening club fair and square, which left one more club to organise, the cooking club, and Lily was conveniently right there to talk to. Sadly, she couldn't get started though because her mixing bowl was broken, so she asked if I could visit Neffy and ask her to fix it. It was a good thing I'd just met her yesterday because I knew exactly where to go. Back to the Dwarven Forge I went, but Neffy also had some sad news to share because she had dropped her tongs down a hole and was too big to go and get them. Fortunately, that was no issue for a tiny hobbit like myself, so off I went to retrieve the tongs. After returning them to Neffy, I was blessed with my new nickname, Tong Friend, and a repaired mixing bowl, which I immediately delivered to Lily. But it turned out the mixing bowl wasn't for Lily, it was actually for me so that I can take part in her cooking club. How sweet. And on that cheerful note, all the clubs were set up. The only thing left to do was to find the old club boards and get them set up again. When I spoke to Marigold about them though, she sadly had no idea where they were, but that was no trouble for Detective Ellie. I found them in moments, hidden away behind this overgrown ivy, and I quickly cleared it away. Now let's chat about clubs. As you've just watched, there are 4 different clubs, and each one has their own quests and rewards. You can accept 10 quests in total across all of the clubs, but I would definitely recommend prioritizing foraging at the start as this is the big one for me. For every foraging quest you complete, you earn points, and as you level up, you'll unlock more backpack space, a much needed upgrade in this game. So I spent the rest of the day making a start on all the quests I'd accepted. The following day, I checked my post for a letter from Nora about the town rules, and Neffy who had some questions for me. Turned out that Neffy did have questions. Questions about how to make friends. As a dwarf, she felt like she didn't fit in with the other hobbits. So I suggested she learn how to cook as making meals for friends was the easiest way to win people over, and offered to make her a meal to show her how it's done. Then I stopped by Nora's place and discovered it was time to get our wolf head. It seemed unlikely that we'd be able to kill a wolf though, as they hadn't been seen here in forever. Also, we were hobbits. But Fosco had another idea. Why didn't we make a wolf's head? The only issue was that no one knew what they looked like. We decided to start by talking to Old Noakes, as his name would suggest he was quite old and might remember the last time the wolves had been seen in Bywater. While he had a lot of exciting stories to share, he hadn't really seen the wolves himself, because he was so young and stayed at home. But he did give us another lead to talk to Marigold. Apparently her family had actually fought them. This sounded really promising, but I made my way to Delphi's first to turn in my foraging quest. Along the way though, I came across a strange stone structure in the middle of the woods, and after contemplating on it for a while, I decided it was the perfect place for a meal with friends and unlocked a new shared meal spot. It was a bit wet and rainy today, but I was sure it would look much better in the sunlight. At Delphi's house, it turned out that I had already hit foraging level 2 and unlocked the lantern. Now I could see much better while exploring at night, and it also hinted at some nighttime secrets as well. How intriguing. I wrapped up the day by chatting to Marigold about the wolf, and she told me about the wolf's great big eyes, which reminded me of a certain fairy tale, before suggesting I talk to Farmer Cotton, whose family used to hunt them. Never one to waste an opportunity, I raced to the pub and found Farmer Cotton drinking away happily, surrounded by friends. He was more than happy to tell me about the wolves, although he didn't have much to add to the conversation, except that a wolf was a type of dog. But it was something, I guess. Day 10 brought with it a ton of mail again, as I'd arranged a 4-person party at the Strange Stone. Besides all the meal requests, I'd also received a letter from Orlo letting me know that Sandyman was getting upset with me for not inviting them for a meal. And a letter from Fosco inviting me to the Great Wolf Unveiling. It was an exciting day to be sure, and I started by cooking food for all of my guests before heading into town. There couldn't be a town meeting without a little bit of arguing and disagreement. But soon it was time for the unveiling of our terrifying wolf's head, which looked more cute than anything else. It didn't take long for Cotton to point out that we were missing one key part, the teeth. So I was sent out on a quest to collect some spiky twigs from the riverbank. When I got there, there were only 2 to be found, which meant that this quest would have to wait another day. I spent the rest of the day cooking up delicious meals for my friends and hosting my first dinner at the 3 Farthing Stone. It went incredibly well, and I collected gifts from all of my guests. On my way back to town, I saw that the sticks had refreshed, and I was able to grab the last pointy stick I needed for the wolf's head. This triggered a new cutscene at the town gate as we installed our new, slightly scarier but still quite cute wolf's head. We soon had it mounted on the gate, and it looked glorious for all of 2 seconds. It turned out that Farmer Cotton had bought dwarven bolts from Hobson, which meant they probably weren't dwarven bolts at all, and they'd given way beneath our tremendous wolf head. It was time to go back to the drawing board. With nothing left to do, I spent my day completing more of the club quest to try and reach new levels. On day 11, I had a full inbox again, filled with many thanks from all my grateful guests yesterday. I also had a letter from Fosco about our next Bywater village issue, which was to create a signature dish, as well as a letter from Fosco and Delphi about becoming better friends. Oh, and 2 letters from Rosie with my inventory overflow items. If you ever have a full inventory, the villagers will always send your rewards to your mailbox, which is nice. After a little bit of morning fishing, I completed the first level of the fishing club and received a rod upgrade with a brand new bobber for enticing more fish. Then I headed into town to talk to Fosco. First, I asked him about the friendship quest, and it turned out that he had a craving for something sweet to eat, and asked me to cook something up for him. I immediately followed up by asking about the Bywater signature dish, and that kicked off a whole new quest. For a village to be recognized, we needed to have a special menu, but there were no guidelines on how to create one. So Nora suggested we talk to some of the villagers and see what they'd like to see in a village meal. In a sense, everyone would be coming together to create the perfect Bywater dish. As Tom Cotton was just outside, he seemed like the obvious first choice. After explaining the situation, I asked him what smell reminded him the most of home, and his answer was poetic, but perhaps not super helpful for designing a dish. Next up was Willow, but on the way there I stopped at home to whip up a quick meal. It turned out that inviting Neffy to lunch yesterday hadn't counted as giving her a meal, so I needed to make something else for her and deliver it in person. Easy enough for me, I was now a cooking expert. Rather than go into Willow's, I decided to drop off Neffy's food straight away, and Neffy was amazed by the meal but couldn't quite figure out how it worked. Every time she thought of cooking, she thought of forging iron, which didn't quite compute with cooking. So I had a new suggestion. It was time for her to join the cooking club and learn from Mrs. Cotton herself. But first, I'd have to invite them both over for a meal. It was somehow evening by the time I finally made it to Willow's house to ask her about the signature dish. When asked what food makes her think of home, she described a creamy fish dish with mushrooms, which just left Sandman to quiz. Next I went to Delphi though and turned in the several completed foraging quests I'd been hoarding, which weren't enough to level up. Yet. I did get a lot of items though, and then we went for a walk on her rooftop. She said she didn't get many villagers, but that I was welcome to use the rooftop to host dinners if I wanted to. It really was the cutest spot, even if I could only see it in the dark right now. Summer was drawing to a close, but there was still lots to do, starting with a visit to Sandyman about the Bywater dish. He wasn't really that interested in taking part until I mentioned that the dish would be cooked. A lot. And that's when he suddenly became very interested. He suggested we make something like pies, or bread, or cakes, or really any sort of meal that included lots and lots of flour. I wonder why. While slightly sinister in design, those were all the villagers I needed to ask about the signature dish, and it was time to report back to Lily. She loved the idea and suggested I arrange a huge meal for everyone who had contributed at the 3 Farthing Stone, and cook them all our new Bywater dish. There were lots of things I needed to collect for that first though. Before starting, I turned in a quest to Rosie and reached level 1 in the gardening club, unlocking a brand new area for my home. While I was excited for the extra space, I was more excited to be able to easily access my home from Willow and Delphi's house. Then it was time to get to cooking, but before I could make the Bywater dish, I had my own dinner guests for today to serve. I whisked up some rhubarb porridge and fish cakes for Neffy and Lily, and we settled down for afternoon tea just as the light of the day started to fade. It went incredibly well, if I do say so myself, and Lily offered to teach Neffy how to cook, starting with some scones, which should be quite simple to make. Hopefully Neffy wouldn't burn down Bywater before we could even make it an official village. It was the final day of summer, and I was determined to finish cooking all of the Bywater pies and serve them to my eagerly awaiting tasters. But I also had a letter from Neffy inviting me to come visit her at her forge. I slaved away all morning in my kitchen cooking up 4 delicious pies, and as I completed the last one, I realised my mistake. I would only be able to invite my friends to gather tomorrow, so we wouldn't be able to complete this questline before the end of summer. It was heartbreaking news, but something to look forward to in autumn. There was one thing I was determined to do before the end of summer though, and that was get a backpack upgrade. As the day turned to evening, I approached Delphi with the final foraging quest I needed and earned level 3 in foraging and 5 new inventory slots. Success! With that quest completed, I went to see Neffy, who took me to a special location, Ladle's private dock. There she told me a story about the Dwarf King and also let me know that from now on I would be one of the select few allowed on Ladle's private dock. What an honour! Of course, I immediately went to fish there until the day turned to night and it was time to head home. Which is where I thought this video was going to end, but it turned out that I'd gotten confused by the starting screens and I had one more day of summer to go. With my 4 pies in hand, I went straight to the free farthing stone and set up a breakfast fit for royalty. Those pies look so delicious, I wish I had one myself. Everyone agreed it was an incredible dish, including Sandyman, but only if it was made with Sandyman's Bywater flour. The truth comes out. Either way, we were all happy, and after collecting my gifts, I spent the rest of the day fishing as I rounded out summer. Phew, this was a long one, but I hope it gave you a good overview of what to expect from Tales of the Shire, as well as some pros and cons. If you like Lord of the Rings, or if you like Fae Farm, I think you'll probably enjoy this one. Let me know if you want to see what happens next, and I'll make a video all about my adventures in autumn and my quest to make Bywater a village. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next video. Bye!